Most people spend their entire life accumulating wealth, but even one wrong move could put your entire fortune at jeopardy. In this episode, we talk about asset protection and the steps you need to take in order to guard your wealth and retire happy.
Are you a working professional but struggling to balance the workload of your career, family, obligations, and preparing for your financial future? If so, this podcast is for you. You've spent years learning your craft, and now it's time to focus on your financial future. This podcast will teach you what you need to retire wealthy and happy. Let's dive in.
Hey, good morning, Jeff. Good morning, Ben and Roger. Welcome to the podcast this morning. We're really excited and lucky to have what I consider a very close friend, someone that I've known for a number of years from real estate investment clubs and working together on various projects. He's helped us with a lot of our legal work. We want to give a really warm welcome to a good friend, Jeff Breglio. Jeff, how are you doing this morning?
I'm great. And thank you for having me on the show. It's an honor and I'm a privilege to be interviewed, and I'm excited to help you guys out.
Hey, the pleasure's all ours. We're just grateful that you could take a few minutes of your time and meet with us for a few minutes. So I want to start by just taking a second, just introducing to you our audience. The podcast is called Retire Wealthy and Happy. And we believe that our listeners are mostly professional people who are involved in their career and looking for a way to increase their investments and help themselves to establish financial freedom, get themselves out of the rat race, so to speak. And so as we start to go over the things that we want to talk to you about, we just want to make sure that we focus on, we're probably not all real estate professionals. They're probably a little more simpler investing strategies and that type of thing. So Jeff, I'm going to want to talk just a little bit about your background. As I understand, at one point you were a professor at a college here in Utah, and you actually had another good friend of ours as a student in that class. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had actually finished law school and was not interested in becoming a lawyer at that point. And so I was in teaching, and I taught both in secondary and higher education, and I taught at a local university. I taught in the business law department, so I used my law degree to teach business law. And then I also taught economics courses because my graduate work was in economics. And it was awesome. I loved teaching. There's probably no better calling than to teach. And that teaching at that level really inspired me to carry on teaching throughout my career. And so I continue to do that today.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know that love of teaching is carried on with you for, in fact, that's how you and I have got to know each other most of the time, is because you've either hosted some of the real estate investing club events. You and I have spoken together at some of them. And, I've done a little bit of teaching myself. I think there's no better way to really learn a subject than when you have to figure it out well enough to be able to teach that to somebody else. So that love of teaching, once you get started, it's an incredibly powerful thing.
Yeah, in fact, I started when I was in college as a teaching assistant. And then, in some classes, but in almost every class, I would hold my own study sessions as if I were a teaching assistant, where I actually forced myself to teach others. And I learned that was the single best way to learn. That's how I did well in school. That was the way, was teaching others.
That's I love that. It's incredibly powerful. It also gives you a chance to give back and share what you've learned with other people. And that's I find that very gratifying myself. And I know that you do also. You recently started a new coaching program, I believe. And I'm not sure if you're calling it a coaching program, but I know that you put together a group of people and are teaching some classes on basic investing and asset protection. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've been a real estate educator now for well over a decade. I've taught both here in Utah and nationally, and to a national audience. And so these were random courses and classes here and there on different investing topics. And I realized that there was a really strong need for a more regular and consistent educational program for real estate. In other words, showing up at this event or that event was great. You got some nuggets of information, you got some good networking, but there's really no way to learn. You can't learn in a 45-minute speech by somebody, or we hear one thing, but then as we all know, every deal is different. And then you come across deals that don't really match what you heard before, and you've got to adapt. So it just seemed as if there needed to be a more consistent education, similar to a university style. So I created REI Mastery U, which is an online, quote unquote, educational university with online education. And now we've begun what we call the Tribe Plus, which is a group of our members that we will meet regularly, a weekly basis, every Tuesday from noon to 2. And we have a group of 4 coaches with experience in real estate and coaching. And we're going to give our students regular and consistent education from a variety of viewpoints, and in a way that I think is really a new way to learn real estate investing here in Utah. And we're excited about it.
How much of that's going to be online and how much of it is going to be in person? It's
weekly in person.
Okay.
We do not stream it because we believe that the best way to learn is in a live classroom setting. We all kind of got COVID lazy and expected everything to land in our living rooms while we're in our pajamas. And we noticed that that's kind of a halfway to learn because there's always a bunch of distractions. And so we're bringing everybody into a classroom with a teacher in front, very university style, which is where you really learn.
Perfect. So I'm going to take just a second here. I'm going to look to my 2 co-hosts, and Ben, Roger, do you guys have any questions, any comments about anything so far?
Yeah. Back to the coaching, or what are we calling that? A meetup, or?
We would call it the REI Tribe Plus. So it's a group of students that just wants a better education.
So back to that, I've heard that Yoshi Shiraki is one of your coaches.
Yoshi Shiraki, Mitch Nelson, and Matt Nelson.
Okay, just 3. I thought there was 4, so I was waiting for a 4th.
Well, I'm the 4th. So me and those guys.
Perfect.
Ben, how about you? Any questions? Any thoughts?
I don't have any questions at the moment, but I just want to throw in for our listeners that we'll have a link to Jeff's program that he's talking about in our show notes so that you can access that and take a look at it.
Perfect. So Jeff, I want to start with talking a little bit about how you actually got started in investing. It sounds like you were teaching some classes at one of the universities, and but what inspired you to move on and go into investing?
I kind of stumbled on it. I was at the university teaching, and a friend of mine had recently come into a little bit of, a lot of cash and needed places to invest it. And he was considering real estate, but he was busy, had his career, and didn't have the time to deal with it. So we partnered, and he provided the cash and I provided the labor, and we started doing flip projects with his money. And it was a fantastic little business model. And I did my first 5 or 6 flips with him. And we just woke up one day and he said, "Hey, let's invest in real estate." So the next day I just found an agent with some experience in investing and bought my first house. And I don't do anything like I did it 25 years ago because of what I've learned over the last 20 years. I had no idea there was even anything called hard money. We use conventional bank loans for our flip projects.
That's incredible.
No.
Tell us about this Provo property.
So I bought my biggest mistake. Is that what you're referring to, Roger?
Yeah.
So one of my first flip projects I bought was a rental property just south of a very large university. And it was a duplex. And so I had 4 students on one side and 5 students on the other. And at student housing, you typically charge by the room or by the student. So when I bought it, I did a call now wholesale. But at the time, it was just a quick remodel, paint, carpet, fixture sort of thing. Got it spruced up to get renters in there. Got it rented out. And I was immediately cash flowing $1,600, which is an amazing cash flow, especially over 20 years ago. And I increased its value simply from that simple paint and carpet and getting it leased out about $55,000. So I knew I could sell it and make about 50 grand. And at the time, one of my very first flip projects, that was a lot of money to me. And I'm like, holy cow, I made $50,000. I'm going to sell this and put that big check in my bank and pat myself on the back, at this great flip project. And then at the time, I didn't realize this, but 10 years later, and even now 20 years later, if I had held that property for this time period, I'd probably be cash flowing. I'd probably own it free and clear and cash flowing $5,000-$6,000 a month on an asset that was worth easily $1 million plus that I bought for $170,000. So I learned the power of buy and hold with a dramatic mistake. And that appreciated that fat. I mean, that would have been in probably 10 years, that increase. And
that is so amazing. Looking backwards from our investing decisions, and it sounds like you're more of a buy and hold type investor. Would you say that?
Yeah, I'm now much more buy and hold. If I do flips, I'm a cash buyer. I usually locate and fund the deal, and I partner with somebody to do all the work. So I do not do the overseeing of any construction these days.
Interesting that your first few deals, it sounds like, were mostly fix and flip type of a deal. And maybe touch base a little bit on the difference. If you were getting started investing, would you be looking for long-term cash flow today, or would you recommend that somebody get started with something more of a fix and flip type of mentality, quick turns?
I think it's going to depend on a couple of things. One, it's going to depend on what your interest and goals are and what your other income streams are. We all need to live, right? We all have to buy food and provide for our housing and family. So generally, we do need some kind of income. So flipping is an income generating real estate business model. And, buy and hold rentals is more of a long-term growth model. So if you're looking to go into, quit your day job and jump right into full-time investing, and you need to replace that income that you previously had in your day job, you may need to do fix and flips because it can provide income. And if you're looking more if you've got a day job or a spouse that has a day job that supports family and you can do other things, I think the long buy and holds is a much stronger financial tool. But of course, it takes a while to build up your portfolio of rental properties and the cash flow from that. So, and that can take a few years or longer, depending on how aggressive you are. So, yeah, it depends on what you need. And I would say start doing, one. But my first year, we did flips and picked up a rental simply because the numbers worked better for a rental. And really understand those two real estate business models first. What is it like to own property? What is it like to have tenants? What is it like to work with contractors? How to control costs? These very basic real estate things that really every deal is going to be one or the other in one regard. And before you get on to more complicated things like wholesaling, seller financing, private lending, really understand the basics of real estate. That's where you learn the most, I think, is doing those flip projects and buying your first rentals. Perfect.
Do you do other types of investing other than real estate, stocks, bonds, Bitcoin, anything like that?
I was in the stock market up until 2007. I was also in real estate at the time pretty heavily, and I saw it coming because I saw what was happening in the finance market and all these crazy investors getting 110, 120% financing with no documentation, et cetera. And I saw it coming and I pulled everything out of the stock market before it crashed. When it hit rock bottom, I put it back in, rode the quick wave back up. And then I'm like, I'm out of the stock market forever. I doubled my money during the recession, but then I took it out, put it all in real estate. And I have nothing in the stocks right now. I do invest in some other businesses, small businesses and startup businesses. But other than that, it's either in hard assets like real estate, or I'm also a private lender. So I loan my money out to other investors.
Well, you have a couple other businesses, I think, that you run also. If I remember right, you do a title company. I know the coaching company is some form of a business for you. What other types of businesses are you involved in?
So I've got the law practice, which I've minimized at this point, but I do still provide legal services. So the law firm, a title company, a real estate lending business, and a real estate coaching business. And then personally, I have a publishing company. I'm a writer, and so I write and publish novels.
Wow, a lot of different things. As you, which one is your favorite? Which one is your
the writing? No doubt.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And one day, that is my retirement. That's how I will retire.
There we go. I think Roger and I don't know if you attended the Tony Robbins seminar last August, but I know Roger and I were there. I laughed when Tony said, "You guys got to figure out what business you're in, what business you're really in, and then what business do you want to be in." The real estate for me. Everybody thinks we're in real estate. The truth is, I think I'm the highest paid babysitter on the planet. That's the business I think we're really in. And anytime you're managing people or properties, I think you just become a big babysitter in some respects. But and like you want to make enough money so that you can retire writing. For me, I want to make enough money so that I can start a YouTube channel. I don't care if anybody watches it at that point. I'm just going to just take my time, ride motorcycles to all the national parks in the country, and enjoy my time. So anyway, it's amazing how investing eventually allows us to do what we really want in life. So.
Yeah, it does. And that's where, the law practice was a fallback career. Real estate was an interesting, fascinating, even challenging and lucrative investment strategy for me. Whereas the stock market was, I felt so vulnerable to outside forces that I had no control over. And I didn't like that feeling. Real estate, once you've become educated and learn it, it's a very controllable investment that really does always appreciate. If you play it right and long term, it's always a good investment. So there was a no-brainer for me.
Perfect. We told the story a little while ago about the perfect market theory. I know you're familiar with it. You probably taught it in some of your economics classes, haven't you?
Actually, no, I've never heard of it.
The perfect market theory basically says that if you invest in any asset is considered a perfect market, and they consider the stock market as a perfect market, one in which all the information is known or should be known at about the same time, that it's impossible.
Competitive market.
Yes.
Okay. That I got.
It's impossible to get a above average rate of return, which takes you right back to the stock market. You can get higher risk by investing in higher beta stocks, right? Riskier stocks, but it's very, very difficult to get out of average rate of return in anything that's a perfectly competitive market. And real estate is not a perfectly competitive market, which that's why I've gravitated to real estate. It sounds like you've come to that same conclusion, that your stocks are, it's very difficult to control them. It's hard to get an above average rate of return.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are so many now international and governmental forces that can have a huge effect on it too. And we're subject to interest rates, but interest rates, typically we have a lot of warning if you pay attention to that. And that's the biggest influence that the government does. But other than that, it's about discovering those pockets and those exciting areas and where you can get much higher than average returns. And anybody can do it. It's about finding the right people, finding the right team, finding the right education, and having the motivation to get it done.
We're going to take a second and switch to asset protection, which is what we really wanted to, what we brought you on for to talk a little bit about. But before we do, Roger, Ben, do you guys have any questions for Jeff?
This isn't really a question, but Jeff, it sounds like you've got a wealth of experience in investing, which is we're always glad to hear from people that have that wealth of knowledge. And I think you're going to share a lot more knowledge about protecting that wealth. And we're excited to hear about that.
I don't. And I'm excited this time because I don't have to worry about breaking out of a plastic garbage bag on stage.
I totally forgot about that, Raj.
Now we got to hear the story.
I seriously need to bring that back. That was a great tool.
I like that. So much fun.
You got to share the story.
I was speaking at one of the real estate investing associations, and we were talking about asset protection, and Roger represented a certain type of protection that was okay, but it wasn't perfect. And so we put a plastic bag on him and asked him if he could punch through. And yes, it was a little constrictive, a little protective, but he could eventually push through it. So it was just a funny way to show that particular structure. And Roger was awesome.
The way I remember it was I was the asset, whether it be a piece of property or whatever. Mm-hmm. And Jeff put a plastic bag on me and said I was protected by a trust. And without telling anybody, he had done a secret little seam with scissors or a knife or something in the plastic bag. And so I had to break out of this plastic bag at the Salt Lake Community College at the bottom of the auditorium. And it wasn't too bad because there was a cut in it. Well, the next time he put another bag on me. So I'm fully encased in a garbage bag with my head poking out. And I was in an LLC, but this time I wasn't able to get out nearly as easy because he hadn't sabotaged the bag or whatever. So anyways, we should talk about that and trusts and LLCs, and so we can understand how to protect our property.
You want me to go for it?
Yeah, let's go ahead. I will start with there's a lot of different types of asset protection, and they start with C corps, S corps, LLCs, trusts. There might even be a few more about that I don't. I'm gonna give you just a few minutes and talk about the difference. Describe what is a C corp versus an S corp, LLC, trust, just a little bit, and then we want to come back and see if there's a better strategy, or if it's a one size fits all best strategy, or if there's different strategies for different types of situations.
Okay. There's a lot of different types of strategies. When we speak asset protection, it's actually not a practice area of the law. It's not a class you take in law school, like an asset protection class, or I'm going to go into asset protection as my practice area. It's actually a combination of different practice areas, typically contract law, business law, which is business structures like LLCs and corps, and trust law. So different kinds of trusts. And we use contracts, LLCs, and trusts in different combinations, in different structures, and different layers to provide asset protection value depending on what we are protecting, whether it's a piece of real estate, which is tied to land and immovable, whether it's cash that's deposited on some account somewhere, whether it might be gold or silver. So there's different kinds of assets. And then, of course, everybody has different goals in asset protection. Some people are protecting their assets from a future divorce, right? And that's a different way to protect things than protecting assets from a lawsuit in case you get into a car accident, or a different protection if you are trying to protect yourself from lawsuits of the tenants in your rental properties. So it's not a one size fits all thing. Whenever I do it, I structure it specifically to the assets and to the goals and needs of the client. But in basics, you're usually going to have some kind of business structure like an LLC. The LLC is now the standard bearer and business entity of choice for all small businesses, and especially in real estate. I haven't formed a corporation in probably 15 years. The C Corp, which is a company like IBM or Xerox or Apple, have shareholders and officers, directors, and then employees. And that structure works well in a very large business setting. Typically, most mom and pop stores and almost all real estate investors have no need for that. So you're probably looking at an LLC. And we can use the LLC in two different functions. You can use it to protect rental properties, and that's one kind of LLC. And you can use it for tax savings on flipping and wholesaling and some other investing techniques. So you have to understand, in real estate, there's a number of ways to make money. That's the joy of real estate. There's not just one, it's not one kind of investment. There's dozens of kinds of investments. And the money you make from those investments is taxed differently. So you do have to kind of pay attention to the taxes, how your asset is taxed. And then the trust. And there's three main trusts that we use. One is a holding trust, which is for holding actual title to real estate. There's a protection trust, which is a very protective tool, and we can talk more about these. And the third is the family living trust, which is more of an estate planning tool, but should be part of your overall asset protection structures. So that's the basics of asset protection. It's just a matter of using different kinds of contracts, like a good lease agreement, right? That's your first line of defense in a rental property is a good contract. That owning that asset in some kind of entity, and it's going to be an LLC or a trust, one of those three trusts.
Perfect. So I want to start. You said you don't use a lot of C corps in the stuff, and I know with the new laws, I don't even know how new they are, but where you can have an LLC, you can have it taxed as a C corp or an S corp or whatever. So we're not necessarily talking about the structure of a C corp versus LLC, but is there some tax advantage? And you're not a CPA, and I'm not a CPA, so we don't want to go into any real depth about it. Is there some tax advantages of using a C corp versus an LLC or an S corp? Do you know?
There's no real tax advantage of a C corp over an S corp or LLC that affects 99% of us. So that's why we typically don't do a C corp. But you can have an LLC and have it taxed like an S corp. So like I was saying, in real estate, there are multiple ways to make money. If you're making money passively, which is a rental property, the IRS considers rent on a rental property, even if you actively manage your own rental property, by the way. So you can be the property manager, but rent from a rental property is considered passive income. So that we're going to always run through an LLC, never a corporation, but always an LLC that's taxed either as a pass-through entity or as a partnership, like you and a spouse. Other ways of making money in real estate, like flip projects. The money you make on a flip is not considered passive income. It's considered ordinary income because the flip property is considered inventory that you turn over. You buy one, you sell it, you buy, you sell, you buy, you sell. No differently than the Gap brings in jeans and then sells jeans, brings in more jeans and sells jeans. So those are businesses like selling T-shirts or hot dogs on the street. It's an active business that you're engaged in, and that money is taxed as ordinary income. So those kinds of incomes that you do get in real estate, we run through an LLC that has an S election on it. In other words, it's taxed like an S corp, and there's just tax savings on the business income if you run the money through that.
Perfect. What about a trust? Why would somebody pick trust? As I understand them, they don't have a lot of protection per se from being sued. Trusts are more likely designed to hide ownership of assets. Is that how you describe that?
It depends on the trust. There's dozens of kinds of trust out there, and lawyers are always creating new kinds of trusts that do new things. So there's sometimes revolutions in the kinds of trust that we use for asset protection. But in general, the three trusts that I mentioned, there's a trust that's designed very simply to hold real estate in a private way. LLCs are registered with your state government, right? You have to go through the Division of Corporations and register the LLC. So there's public information about LLCs and who's involved with them. Trusts are not registered with any state government. So they're private documents, and you can hide, the owners behind a trust. So all trusts provide that kind of privacy that some investors are looking for. But there's one trust that we use for essentially just holding on title to the asset in a private way so that people don't know who owns it. Then there is the irrevocable trust, and there's a number of irrevocable trusts. These are actually highly, highly protective tools. Now, they are the most protective tool that we have. There are some hiccups about using an irrevocable trust, and they don't work for everybody, but it is truly the most protective tool we have, and I can talk more about that. And then there's the family living trust, which is a trust that you use for your family to take care of your assets, to allocate and control your assets after you die, which is a form of protection, right? Because if you don't have a family trust set up and you die, guess who's going to come in and tell you what to do with your assets, right? The government is. which you lose that control and protection of what you want to do with your assets. So every family should have that family trust set up so that when they pass away, that all the wealth they've built over their lifetimes gets controlled and allocated the way they want to. So again, it's very common, to use all three of those kind of trusts in your protection structure, depending again, how much you're protecting, what you're protecting, and for how long you want to protect it.
Perfect. So, is there one of these strategies? Do you have like a go-to strategy for protection, or is there? Does it really just depend on the person and what they're doing?
My recommendation for the 20 years that I practiced law was always start as simply as possible. There are very, very complicated protection structures, right? You can get all the way up to the Donald Trump level where there's probably hundreds of trust and LLCs in certain combinations. But you're also going to spend, the more complicated your structure, the more you're going to spend for it, the more you're going to spend to maintain it. And if you don't maintain it correctly, the more likely you are to lose the protections because you didn't run it correctly. So when I meet with clients and I got a client that says, hey, I really want to pick up my first rental property. I've got a good day job, but I've got this real estate agent who's really educated in investing, is going to help me buy my first rental. I'm going to start building a portfolio of rental properties. I'm like, that's awesome. Let's set up your LLC to hold your rental properties and let's start there, right? And as you pick up a couple more and you build your wealth a little bit more, then we'll add in different layers of protection. Because you can come to me and I can build you a very expensive structure, but if you don't know how to run the LLC and then how to incorporate trusts in it, you'll blow it or you won't use it because it's too complicated or too hard, and then you've just wasted all the money you spent setting up the structure in the first place. So generally, the first thing any client is going to have, and my first recommendation is get an LLC to either run your business if you're flipping, or to hold your rental property if you want to be a landlord, and really understand how to run that LLC and that asset, and then grow from there.
Hey, Jeff, you've said a couple times the word maintain, which it sounds like that applies to LLCs and trusts and maybe some other pieces. Can you go into what that involves, what that means a little bit for our listeners? Because, maintaining probably has a lot of things connected to it, right?
Yeah. For example, if you have an LLC that owns a rental property, then first, title to the house should be held in the LLC. If the LLC doesn't physically own the asset, then it's not part of the company. The LLC should have its own bank account, and that bank account should receive income from the asset that it owns. And when you make distributions, those distributions go back to the owners. If you as an individual start paying the utility bill on the rental property from your personal business account or from your personal bank account, what you're doing is commingling funds. You're not running the finances of the LLC correctly. If you set up an LLC, and this is what most people, where they make the mistake is, they set up a business that, hey, it's just me, right? I'm the only person involved. Then I don't really need to run it like a true business, right? Well, if you wanted to recoup some of your out-of-pocket costs from your business, you fill out a form, you submit it to your manager approves it, and then the company reimburses you for some expense, right? Well, you have to do the same thing. Even though it's just you, if you have to have an out-of-pocket expense that you want your business to reimburse you for, you just can't take money out and say, I'm reimbursing myself, right? You're stealing money from a company without going through the proper channels. So it's things like that, holding meetings, writing things down, keeping receipts, doing the appropriate bookkeeping and not commingling funds. When you sign lease agreements, right? Those lease agreements need to name the LLC as the landlord, right? Otherwise, if you put your own name as the landlord, you've now entered, you just made yourself liable on that lease agreement when really it's supposed to be your LLC. So it's things like that. It's just understanding how to run a business like an actual business.
Is there any difference between maintaining an LLC and maintaining a trust?
Yeah, the trust has slightly different rules, but things like ownership and title are really important. Not commingling funds, because the trust will actually have its own bank account, and it's run just like an LLC is, and so everything has to go through that account. And it's basically that is the same rules. you just sign things differently and that sort of thing. But yeah, you do need to maintain it. And we provide a lot of stuff through my website on maintaining those structures because it's just as important as setting them up.
Thank you. That makes sense.
So Jeff, let's. You've been an attorney for quite some time. I know you've done had a lot of situations that you've been involved in. Without divulging any confidential information or anything like that, do you have any situations where you've represented somebody that they really wish that they had gotten asset protection before they got started?
Yeah, unfortunately. It was really quite simple. They just, it was a client that I didn't work with that came to me later and had a rental property and was in her individual name. And one of her tenants slipped on some ice in the winter. This is Utah, right? We got snow, especially this year, and didn't realize that she was responsible for maintaining, the snow removal. And a tenant slipped and fell, got a lawyer, sued, $500,000+ judgment against her, which ended up being. But she came to me as soon as the lawsuit was filed and said, is there anything I can do? And I said, not at this point, because when the fall happened, you were the owner of the property as an individual. So now you as an individual are going to have to be sued because that was who owned the house at the time the accident happened. So there's nothing I can do and go backwards and make something different that was yesterday. Yesterday is yesterday. It's done. I can't change it. So it is much smarter to have this done in advance because you can't do much for it. You can't do much after the fact.
And, the cost of setting up an LLC, even through an attorney, they're not that expensive relative, I would guess.
Mine are $400 or $500 up to about $800.
Versus how much did I'm sure the just to pay the retainer to represent herself through the process.
Yeah, I think insurance covered about $250,000. That was her liability policy on her insurance. But the other remaining $250,000 hit her personally, and then her legal fees.
Ouch. So it's really, really important if you're out there and you're thinking about starting a business or investing in some sort of real estate or whatever, that you seek really, really competent legal advice and put together a strategy. I know, Jeff, you helped us. The last one we did, I think it was four LLCs tied together just for one investment vehicle. So, and we're grateful every single time because we're exposed quite a bit with all sorts of real estate assets. And so we're really, really grateful for the advice that you've given to us to keep us out of trouble, so to speak. What about a success? Have you ever come out of court with a client of yours and said, oh my gosh, wasn't that the best $700 you ever spent?
Yeah, I mean, I've had at least 8 to 10 clients sued in lawsuits from slip and falls at rental properties, and not a dime came out of their personal account. And anything that was over what was insured was essentially, if it's an LLC and that LLC, and you have a $500,000 judgment against the LLC, and all it owns is that one property. Yeah, that one property is at risk, but you just file bankruptcy on the LLC. That erases the debt, and then it just goes away. And all your other assets, your personal savings account, jewelry and clothes and artwork you may have in your house, to a small degree, your primary residence is usually protected. So it's the baseline. That LLC is just your base structure in any kind of business pursuit, and real estate investing is a business pursuit.
Perfect. Ben, Roger, any comments, questions?
I wanted to ask a little bit more about trusts, and if you're going to get into this, we can wait, but do trusts have any benefit for a living person, or does a trust mostly benefit somebody after they pass away?
Both, depending on the trust.
Okay.
So a irrevocable trust, and in Utah, we have something called the Domestic Asset Protection Trust, or DAPT. And about 17 states have this kind of trust or a variation of this trust. And it is an asset protection tool while you are alive. So it's a vehicle in which you can put assets, particularly assets that don't generate income. It works fantastic for that. For sort of example, if someone has a primary residence with a lot of equity in it, which these days a lot of us do, right? After the last 5 years of our market, a lot of us have a good significant amount of equity in our private homes. And of course, that's not an income property. It doesn't generate income. And if you put it into one of these domestic asset protection trusts or irrevocable trust of some kind, it could be protected from all kinds of lawsuits. It could be protected from slip and falls at a rental property you own. It'll be protected from debtor or creditors coming after you for defaulted loans. It'll protect you if you are in a car accident and you kill a family. It'll protect the assets from that. So it's highly, highly protected while you are alive. There are some restrictions on your use of the asset. So it doesn't work for everybody. It takes a little more of a dialogue with your attorney to see if that trust is right for you, because there are some, like I said, hiccups, some little hurdles that don't make it perfect. But to get that kind of protection, you have to give up something, right? You don't get something for nothing. And so it's highly, highly protective. And if it works for you, it's great. So that's that's the trust that protects your assets while you're alive. Then the family living trust, which is what most people think of when we talk about trusts, right? Because most people have heard, a family living trust, I need that. A family living trust is usually a set of documents that includes the family trust, the wills, powers of attorney, the living will, which is a healthcare directive, and some other documents. So it's usually a group of documents to manage and control and distribute your estate after you pass away. And once you pass away, that trust does become irrevocable and highly protective. But it's more of an estate tool rather than a, I want to protect my stuff now tool.
Be better off using an LLC for the here and now, right?
The here and now, yes. So we use our LLCs, and then we'll add on that irrevocable trust as an additional layer after their asset classes, have built up somewhat. And then we can use other trusts to separate title to property. And so, we just sort of grow with our clients and become more complicated as their assets dictate the need for more protection.
Jeff, this might be too much of a generalization, but would you say, generally speaking, that a trust is more used for personal situations and an LLC is more used for business situations?
Yeah, you could phrase it like that. If you're running any kind of operational something, right? You're selling T-shirts, you're selling hot dogs, you're giving piano lessons, you're flipping homes, you're a wholesaler, you're a private lender, you're a landlord. These are things that require activity, right? Typically, those are going to be all LLCs. An LLC is a business structure for running kinds of businesses. Trusts, while there are business trusts and ways of using a trust as a business structure, it's just not, I've never found it worth it. We've had some clients, we've gone down that road and it wasn't very functional. They don't function well as a business structure. So the trust is used more for big umbrella protection, for privacy, and for after death control.
I have a very specific question for you, Jeff. So our company, our team, we invest in real estate. And when we buy projects, we have, like Earl was saying, multiple layers of LLCs, which you've helped us with some of those. So the project already has LLCs for protection. If an investor was coming into a project passively, do they need an LLC? Or if they're investing as an individual in that project, does it make any difference? Because you've already got quite a bit of protection on the LLC. Does that make sense?
Yeah. If you're coming in as a passive investor, a true limited partner where you are putting up some funds, right, and you have no management control or say in any of the running of the company, right, you are already granted really, really strong protection from debts and liability that company might incur. So really, there's no need for you to enter into one of like a syndication as a limited partner in other kind of entities for protection value. Now, there may be other reasons why somebody may use an entity. For example, here in Utah, we have a series LLC that can own multiple passive investments, and you could use a series of that to own your ownership in a syndication, for example, and then the passive income you're receiving from the syndication is flowing through the same business entity as the passive income from your other rental properties that you directly own. So it's a way of taking all this similar kind of income and running it through one tax return, right? Which makes that tax return bigger, which we can use then for qualifying for loans and stuff like that. So there's those considerations as well, but they're usually a tax or something financial, or to run the money through different avenues based on those goals. So, but for protection, no, you're pretty good even as an individual.
Thank you. That's a great answer.
Hey, Jeff, we really appreciate your time. We don't want to take too much more of your time. I do want to touch base. I think you've covered some of it, but people always ask me about legacy wealth. I think the question that I always get is with this these assets that you're accumulating, have you thought about setting up a way to pass down to your children? The running joke that I always tell is that I don't want to ruin my children, and that I plan to spend the last $50 just before they put me 6 feet under. But I'm honestly just joking when I say that. But talk for a second about legacy wealth and how you would take care of that if that was something that was important to you.
Yeah. So, we talk legacy wealth, and the wealth that not only, as we build our wealth and our assets and our income streams, it's usually for retirement, our own retirement, right? So we can retire financially free and not work until we drop into the bucket. And legacy is just taking some of that wealth and leaving it to our heirs. And there's a lot of ways to do that and protect that. Remember that if it's not protected in your current life, not protected right now, it's not going to be protected after you die. And so if you want to leave something to children, typically we start splitting those assets off away from your need for retirement income, and we put them in those irrevocable trusts, right? And they sit there for long periods of time. It's not something that you're going to pull out, say, hey, I need that asset in there, this year to sell off so I can spend the next 2 years in retirement, and you're going to keep pulling them out. You put them in there specifically, because it's your intention to leave it to your children, right? And it's the most protective tool we have while alive is these irrevocable trusts. And so, it's just a matter of identifying that percentage of your assets and start protecting them in different ways so that they're around for your kids.
I joke about spending my last dime or whatever, but so I don't ruin my children. But the truth is, there are ways that you can. They joke about the Kennedys and how he set up a trust that he basically controlled the wealth from the grave, so to speak, so that nobody could just take and do whatever they wanted with it. So
that's the great thing about the trust, whether it's in the irrevocable one or the family living, you are in complete control of what happens after you die. So you don't have to leave everything to your children upon your death. You can hold it until they reach a certain age. You can hold it until they achieve a certain goal, such as graduating from college. You can spread it out over time where they get some percentage every 5 years. You can hold it until they're 55 years old. So you can control your wealth even from the grave through one of these trusts.
Perfect, man. We really appreciate the time that you spent with us. I'm gonna give each one of my partners just a second and see if they have any follow-up questions, anything like that. But man, we really appreciate you personally and the great friend and business associate that you are. But we appreciate you taking a few minutes this morning and spending some time with us and our listeners. But Ben and Roger, any questions that you have follow-up?
We have 4 questions that we're going to ask all our interviewees. And so, all right. So for our 4 questions for our interviewees, we'd like to ask Jeff, what is your favorite business book?
Whenever I'm asked what is my favorite book or favorite anything, it's always in my mind, my favorite most recent book. Otherwise, there's too many to choose from. I actually really enjoyed, and I didn't get this necessarily for business, but I use it in business. It's called Breathe by James Nestor. It's about breathing and the history of breathing, what's happened to our breathing. And I have found that in work, I have a tendency to sort of go, which is sort of a situation of non-breathing. And once you learn the importance of breath and how to use breath, you can actually direct it to a more focused business environment. So it actually allows me to be more focused. And when I desire to get work done, I'm much more focused in my breathing. And I found it a great business aid.
Great. Since you mentioned that you write novels, we thought it'd be a good question. What is your regular favorite book?
The book, my most favorite book recently is Light from Uncommon Stars. It's a book about a violin teacher and a violin student, but it really describes the creation of music really beautifully. And it kind of applies to just everything in your life about creation, which I think is my answer to one of your follow-up questions, one of the ones down the list. But it's a great way to understand music and people who are in music, and what they get out of music. It's unless that's you, it's really hard to understand. But this book really describes what it's like to be in music and feel music, and it's just a beautiful book.
That's cool. My dad was a violin teacher.
Oh, cool.
What does retirement look like for you?
Creation. Creating something like writing, right? That's creating something out of me, turning an idea into my head into something concrete, which is what you can do in business as well. I mean, building a business is an act of creation, right? It's taking an idea, a passion and excitement, and actually making it come to fruition. The coaching and the teaching is an act of creation. And so retirement to me is creating what I want, when I want, at all times. And that probably means writing.
and probably where you want to.
Where you want. Yes, absolutely. On a beach, not in the snow, on a beach.
Right. Sounds like we can hear Morgie the corgi in the background.
Yeah, he's my little cheerleader.
All right. And question number 4. What do you think is the best way to give back?
Sharing your voice. And whether that means saying something kind to somebody, giving them knowledge and information that you have, sharing your experience, but using your voice, speaking to others about something that you're passionate, because that can fill them with that same passion. And that's a great gift to give.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeff, where can our listeners find you online? Is the website we referenced earlier the best place to find you, or
Yep.
what are the best places?
www.reimasteryu.com.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well. So we'll send people there for you. Thank you.
So we appreciate Jeff for the time that he's taken with us. We just want to acknowledge that he shared some really valuable points with us today. Some how to get started, the importance of asset protection, how a few dollars spent today will save you a fortune in the long run if you run into problems, and also the idea that some basic asset protection, from protecting a single asset to some long-term wealth strategies, legacy wealth strategies. So again, we hope that our listeners got something out of this, and we're just really grateful again for Jeff taking some time and sharing those with us. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, guys. It was an honor.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to have you here.
Hope you got value from this episode. And if you have a minute, then take the time to leave an honest written review for the podcast, because we take those reviews seriously, and it'll help us serve you better on the next episodes. And most importantly, be sure to start taking action so you can control your financial future today.